Hello guys, I am Sketching Thoughts, and today we are going to see the psychology of people who imagine fake scenarios before sleep. Every night, just before sleep, your mind becomes a movie theater. You imagine conversations that never happened, arguments that will probably never happen, success stories that don't exist yet. Sometimes you become the hero, sometimes the victim, sometimes you're explaining yourself to people who aren't even there. And strangely, you can spend hours inside these imaginary worlds without realizing it. But have you ever wondered why your brain does this? Why does your mind create entire alternate realities when the day is finally over? And why does it happen most intensely right before sleep? The answer is deeper than it seems, because these imaginary scenarios aren't random. They're trying to do something for you. The question is, what? For some people, these scenarios are comforting. You imagine getting recognition, finding love, winning an argument, finally saying the perfect thing. For others, the scenarios are stressful. You replay mistakes, create future disasters. Imagine rejection, embarrassment, failure. The strange part is that even when the scenarios feel bad, your brain keeps creating them night after night. During the day, distractions keep your attention occupied. Work, college, phones, people, noise. But at night, everything becomes quiet, and in that silence, your inner world gets louder. You may notice yourself reading stories where you're admired or understood, or finally becoming the person you want to be. Over time, these fantasies can become more than entertainment. They can become emotional substitutes for confidence, connection, achievement, or closure. And without realizing it, you start living two lives, the real one and the imagined one. The real life feels limited, messy, uncertain. The imagined life feels controllable, predictable, perfect. And this creates an interesting psychological tension, because the more rewarding the fantasy becomes, the harder reality can feel. But this doesn't mean something is wrong with you. In fact, the opposite might be true. Most people assume imagining fake scenarios means they're avoiding reality. Sometimes that's true, but often it's something else, something much more human. Your brain is not trying to deceive you. It's trying to prepare you. The mind evolved to simulate. Long before humans had modern tools, imagination allowed people to rehearse possibilities. What if that animal attacks? What if food becomes scarce? What if I approach this person? The brain learned that imagining the future could increase survival. So the ability to create scenarios became one of humanity's greatest strengths. The problem isn't imagination itself. The problem is when imagination becomes disconnected from action. Then preparation turns into endless rehearsal, and rehearsal turns into escape. What feels like overthinking is often an adaptation that has lost its direction. You're not broken. Your brain is using an ancient tool. It's just using it in a way that may no longer help you. But to understand why it happens before sleep specifically, we need to look inside the brain. There is a network in the brain called the default mode network. Think of it as the brain's background storyteller. When you're focused on a task, this storyteller becomes quieter. But when external activity decreases, it wakes up, and bedtime creates the perfect conditions. The room is dark. The body becomes still. External demands disappear, so the storyteller begins working. It starts reviewing the past, predicting the future, creating possibilities, connecting memories, building stories. Here's a simple mental model. Imagine your mind as a theater. During the day, reality is on stage. At night, the audience leaves, the lights dim, and imagination takes over the performance. This is why one thought can suddenly become a 30-minute fantasy. Your brain isn't following logic anymore. It's following emotional significance. The scenarios that appear most often usually point towards something emotionally unfinished. A need, a fear, a desire, a question, something your mind believes still requires attention. And because emotions are stronger than facts, the brain keeps returning to those themes, not because they're true, but because they feel important. Understanding this changes everything, because now the goal isn't stopping imagination. The goal is understanding what it's trying to tell you. So how do you work with this tendency instead of fighting it? Let's explore 4 principles. 1. Identify the emotional theme. Instead of analyzing the entire scenario, look for the emotion underneath it. Ask yourself, what feeling keeps appearing? Maybe it's validation, maybe it's fear, maybe it's loneliness, maybe it's achievement. The brain repeats emotionally important material. When you identify the theme, you stop getting lost in the story. Example, if you constantly imagine becoming successful and admired, the real emotional need may be recognition, not fame, recognition. Once you see that, the scenario becomes easier to understand. 2. Move. The fantasy into reality psychology shows that action reduces mental looping. The brain stops rehearsing when it receives evidence. If you imagine becoming a musician every night, take one real step tomorrow. Practice, record something, learn one skill. The action doesn't need to be huge. It just needs to exist, because reality gives feedback. Fantasy does not, and feedback helps the brain update its predictions. 3. Create a parking space for thoughts. Many nighttime scenarios appear because the brain fears forgetting something important. A simple journal can help. Before sleep, write down worries, ideas, or unfinished unfinished tasks. This signals safety. The brain no longer needs to hold everything in active memory. As a result, mental activity often becomes quieter. You're essentially telling your mind, you don't have to keep reminding me, I've stored it. 4. Treat scenarios as messages, not reality. This may be the most important principle. Just because your brain creates a scenario doesn't mean it predicts the future. Thoughts are simulations, not prophecies. Imagine weather forecasts. Some forecasts become reality, others don't, but all of them are possibilities. Your mind works similarly. The scenario isn't necessarily true. It's simply one possibility your brain is exploring. When you remember this, you create distance, and distance creates calm. If you're enjoying this video so far, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps Sketching Thoughts reach more people who quietly struggle with the same questions. And please do 500 likes on these video, then I will make second part of these video. Now let's continue. Here's the simple mental model to remember. Your imagination is a messenger, not a master. Every fake scenario carries information, a need, a fear, a hope, a wound, a desire. Most people get trapped inside the story, but the real value lies beneath it. The scenario itself isn't the message. The emotion underneath it is. Once you understand that, your nighttime imagination becomes less confusing. You stop asking, why do I keep imagining this? And start asking, what is this trying to show me? That single shift changes the relationship completely. Tonight, when your mind starts creating another imaginary world, don't rush to stop it. Just observe it. Notice the characters. Notice the emotions. Notice what keeps returning. Because hidden inside those late-night stories, there may be a part of you still trying to be heard. Not every fantasy is an escape. Sometimes it's a signal pointing towards something unfinished, something important, something real. And perhaps the goal was never to silence your imagination. Perhaps the goal was simply to understand it. Because when you finally understand the stories your mind keeps telling, you begin to understand yourself. And that understanding is often much more powerful than the fantasy itself. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the mind behind the thoughts. Sketching Thoughts.